Chronicles of Narnia, The Last Battle. Chapter 2, The Rashness of the King. About 3 weeks later, the last of the kings of Narnia sat under the great oak which grew beside the door of his little hunting lodge, where he often stayed 10 days or so in the pleasant spring weather. It was a low thatched building not far from the eastern end of Lake Lantern Waste, and somewhere above meeting of the two rivers. He loved to live there and simply at ease, away from his state and pomp of Che Paravel, the royal city. His name was King Trelian, and he was between 20 and 25 years old. His shoulders were already broad and strong, and his limbs full of hard muscle, but his beard was scanty. He had blue eyes and a fearless, honest face. There was no one with him that spring morning except his dearest friend Jewel the unicorn. They loved each other like brothers, and each had saved another's life in the wars. The lordly beast stood beside the king's chair, with its neck bent around and polishing its blue horn against the creamy whiteness of its flank. "I cannot set myself to work or sport today, Jewel," said the king. "I can think of nothing about this wonderful news. Think you we shall hear any more of it today?" "They are the most wonderful tidings ever heard in our days or grandfathers' days, sire," said Jewel. "If they are true—" "How can they choose but be true?" said the king. "It is more than a week ago that the first birds came flying over us, saying Aslan is here, Aslan has come to Narnia again, and after that it was the squirrels. They had not seen him, but they said it was certain that he was in the woods. Then came the stag. He had said that he had seen with his own eyes a great way off by moonlight in Lantern Waste. Then came that dark man with the beard, the merchant from Calamin. The Calamines care nothing for Aslan as we do, but the man spoke of it as a thing beyond doubt. And there was a badger at last night, and you too had seen Aslan." "Indeed, sire," answered Jewel, "I believed all. If I seem not to, it is the only joy that is too great to let my belief settle itself. It is almost too beautiful to believe." "Yes," said the king with a great sigh, almost a shiver of delight. "It is beyond all that I have ever hoped for in my life." "Listen," said Jewel, putting his head on the side of it and cocking his ears forward. "What is it?" said the king. "Hoofs, sire," said Jewel. "A galloping horse, a very heavy horse. It must be one of the senators. And look, here he is." A great golden-bearded senator with mad sweat on his forehead and horse's sweat on his chestnut flanks dashed up to the king and stopped in bow. "Hail, king!" it cried in a voice as deep as a bull's. "Who there?" said the king, looking over his shoulder towards the door of the hunting lodge. "A bowl of wine for the noble senator. Welcome, Runewit. When have you found your breath, you shall tell us your errand." A page came out of the house carrying a great wooden bowl, curiously carved, and handed it to the senator. The senator raised the bowl and said, "I drink first to Aslan and Truth, sire, and secondly to your majesty." He finished the wine, enough for 6 strong men, at once, and brought it to the He finished the wine, enough for 6 strong men, at one draught, and handed the empty bowl back to the page. "Now, Runewit," said the king, "do you bring us more news of Aslan?" Runewit looked very grave, frowning a little. "Sire," he said, "you know how long I have lived and studied the stars, for we senators live longer than men, and even younger than your kind, unicorn. Never in all my days have I seen such terrible things written in the skies as there have been nightly since this year began. Our stars say nothing of the coming of Aslan, nor of peace, nor of joy. I know by my art that they have not seen such disastrous conjunctions of the planets for 500 years. It was already in my mind to come and warn your majesty that some evil things hang over Narnia. But last night the rumour reached me that Aslan is abroad in Narnia. Sire, do not believe this tale. It cannot be. The stars never lie, but men and beasts do. If Aslan were really coming to Narnia, the sky would have foretold it. If he were really come, all the most gracious stars would be assembled in his honour. It is all a lie." "A lie?" said the king fiercely. "What creature in Narnia or all the world would dare to lie on such a matter?" And without knowing it, he laid his hand on the sword hilt. "That I know not, Lord King," said the senator, "but I know that there are liars on the earth, and there are none among the stars." "I wonder," said Jewel, "whether Aslan might not come true or the stars foretold otherwise. He is not the slave of the stars, but their maker. It is not said that the old story that he is not a tame lion." Well said, Jewel," cried the king. "Those are the very words, not a tame lion. It comes in many tales." Runewit had just raised his hand and was leaning forward to say something very earnestly to the king when all 3 of them turned their heads to listen to a wailing sound that was quickly drawing nearer. The wood was so thick to the west of them so they could not see the newcomer yet, but soon they would all hear the words. Woe, 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 called the voice. Woe for my brothers and sisters! Woe for the holy trees! The woods are laid waste! The axe is loosed against us! We are being felled! Great trees are falling, falling, falling! With the last falling, the speaker came in sight. She was like a woman, but so tall that her head was on level with the senator's, yet she was like a tree too. It was hard to explain if you have never seen a dryad, but quite mistakable once you have. Something different in the colour, voice, and the hair. King Trinian and the two beasts knew at once that she was the nymph of a beech tree. Justice, Lord King, she cried. Come to our aid, protect your people. They are felling us in the lantern waste. 40 great trunks of my brothers and sisters are already on the ground. What lady? Felling lantern waste? Murdering the talking trees? Cried the king, leaping to his feet and drawing his sword. How dare they? And who dares it? Now by the maid of Aslan! Ha! Gasped the dryad, shuddering as if in pain, shuddering time after time as if under repeated blows. Then all at once she fell sideways as suddenly as if both her feet had been cut from under her. For the second they saw her lying dead on the grass, and then she vanished. They knew that what had happened. Her tree, miles away, had been cut down. For a moment the king's grief and anger was so great that he could not speak. Then he said, Come, friends, we must go up to the river and find the villains who have done this, with all the speed we may. I will not leave one of them alive. Sire, with a good will, said Jewel. But Runeward said, Sire, be wary on your just wrath. There are strange doings on foot. If there should be rebels in arms further up the valley, we three are too few to meet them. If it would please you to wait a while. I will not wait the 10th part of a second, said the king. But while Jewel and I go forward, do gallop as hard as you may to Chair Paravel. There's a ring for your token. Get me a score of men-at-arms, all well mounted, and a score of talking dogs, 10 dwarfs, let them all fell archers, and a leopard or so, stone-foot giant. Bring all of these after as quickly as may be. With a good will, sire, said Runeward, and once he turned and galloped eastward down the valley. The king strode on a great pace, sometimes muttering to himself, sometimes clenching his fist. Jewel walked beside him, saying nothing, so there was no sound between them but the faint jingle of a rich gold chain that hung around the unicorn's neck, and the noise of 2 feet and 4 hoofs. They soon reached the river and turned up where there was a grassy road, that the water on their left and the forest on their right. Soon after that they came to the place where the ground grew rougher and thick wood came out down the water's edge. The road, what there was of it, now ran on the southern bank, and they had to ford the river to reach it. It was up to Trinian's armpits, but Jewel, who had 4 legs and therefore steadier, kept on his right so as to break the force of the current. Trinian put his strong arm around the unicorn's strong neck, and they both got safely over. The king was still so angry that he had hardly noticed the cold of the water, but of course he dried his sword very carefully on the shoulder of his cloak, which was the only dry part of him, as soon as they came to shore. They were now going westward at the river on their right, and Lantern Waste was straight ahead of them. They had not gone more than a while when both of them stopped, and both spoke at the same moment. The king said, What have we here? And Jewel said, Look! It is a raft, said King Trinian, and so it was. 6 splendid tree trunks, and all newly cut and newly lopped off their branches, had been lashed together to make a raft, and were gliding swiftly down the river. On the front of the raft there was a Rater Rat with a pole to steer it. Hey, Water Rat, what are you about? Cried the king. Taking logs to sail down to the Calamine, sire, said the rat, touching his ear as he might have touched the cap if he had one. Calamines? Thundered Trinian. What do you mean? Who gave order for these trees to be felled? The river flowed so swiftly that that time of the year the raft had already glided past the king and Jewel, but the water rat looked back over his shoulder and shouted out, The lion's order, sire! Aslan himself! He added something more, but they couldn't hear it. The king and the unicorn stared at one another, and both looked more frightened than they had ever been in any battle. Aslan, said the king at last in a very low voice. Aslan, could it be true? Could he be felling the holy trees and murdering the dryads? Unless the dryads have done something dreadfully wrong, murmured Jewel. But selling them to the Calamines, said the king. Is it possible? I don't know, said Jewel miserably. He's not a tame lion. Well, said the king at last, we must go on and take the adventure that comes to us. It is the only thing left for us to do, sire, said the unicorn. He did not see at any moment how foolish it was for the 2 of them to go on alone, nor did the king. They were too angry to think clearly, but much evil came for their rashness in the end. Suddenly the king leaned hard on his friend's neck and bowed his head. Jewel, he said, what lies before us? Horrible thoughts arise in my heart. If we had died today before we should have been very happy. Yes, said Jewel, we have lived too long. The worst thing in the world has come upon us. They stood like that for a minute or two and then went on. Before long they could hear the hack, hack, hack of axes falling on timber, though they could see nothing yet because there was a rise of the ground in front of them. When they had reached the top of it they could see right into Lantern Waste itself, and the king's face turned white when he saw it. Right through the middle of that ancient forest, that forest where trees of gold and silver had once grown, and where a child from our world once planted the tree of protection, a broad lane that had already been opened. It was a hideous lane, like a raw gash in the land, full of muddy ruts, where fell trees had been dragged down to the river. There was a great crowd of people at work, and a cracking of whips, and horses tugging and straining as they dragged the logs. The first thing that struck the king and the unicorn was that half of the people crowd were not talking beasts or men. The next thing was that these men were not fair-haired men of Narnia. They were dark, bearded men from Calamin, that great cruel country that lies beyond Archenland across the desert of the south. There was no reason, of course, why one should not meet a Calamin or two in Narnia, even a merchant or ambassador, nor there was peace between Narnia and Calamin in those days, but Trinian could not understand why there were so many of them, nor why they were cutting down a Narnian forest. He grasped his sword tighter and rolled his cloak around his left arm. They came quickly down among the men. 2 Calamines were driving a horse which was harnessed to a log. Just as the king reached them, the log had got struck by a muddy place. "Get on, son of a sloth! Pull, you lazy pig!" cried the Calamines, cracking their whips. The horse was already straining himself as hard as he could. His eyes were red, and he was covered with foam. "Work, lazy brute!" shouted one of the Calamines, and as he spoke he struck the horse savagely with his whip. It was then that the really dreadful thing happened. Up till now Trinian had taken it for granted that the horses which the Calamines were driving were their own horses, dumb, witless animals like the horses of our own world, and though he hated to see even a dumb horse overdriven, he was of course thinking more about the murder of the trees. It had never crossed his mind that anyone would dare to harness one of the free talking horses of Narnia, much less use a whip on it. But as the savage blow fell on the horse, it reared up and said, half screaming, "Fool and giant! How do you not see that I am doing all I can?" When Trinian knew that the horse was one of his own Narnians, there came over him and over Jewel such a rage that they did not know what they were doing. The king's sword went up and the unicorn's horn went down. They rushed forward together. The next moment the Calamines lay dead, the one beheaded by Trinian's sword and the other gored through by the heart of Jewel's horn.